A very good morning to all. Good morning, sir.
Very good morning. Very good morning. Yeah,
I hope you had a great time yesterday with us.
yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay, sir. So today we'll be having the class 2 of session number 1, continuation of anatomy of urinary system by Dr. Sharath S.G., HOD and Associate of Rachana Sharira, Amrita School of Ayurveda, Kollam, Kerala. So the second class. Thank you. And before starting the session, I'd like to have the prayer.
ॐ नमामि धन्वन्त्रि आदिदेवं सुरासुरे वन्दितं पादपादनं लोके जरारुके भया मृत्युनाशं दधारिषं विभित्पाशधीनां धन्वन्त्रि प्रमानाथं सर्वरोगे निवारकम् आयुर्वेद प्रभक्तारं वन्दे पीयूषं दायकम् सर्वे जना सुखिनो भवन्तु सर्वे सन्तु निरामया ॐ शान्तिः 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 ॐ
Thank you, Ritika. So you can continue with your class.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anand.
Okay.
Very good morning, everyone. Yesterday we discussed the anatomy of kidney as well as the ureter, and today we'll continue with the anatomy of urinary bladder as well as the urethra. So that completes the anatomy of the urinary system. So we'll start with the urinary bladder. So urinary bladder is basically a muscular bag, okay, which is considered as the reservoir of urine. So meaning the urine is mainly secreted by the kidneys and it is traveling through the ureter and it reaches the urinary bladder and it stays there for some time and then it is expelled out. So that's why it is named as reservoir of urine. Then Then coming to the shape of the, it is said to be like tetrahedral shape in when it is empty or when it is full or distended, it is ovoid in shape. Okay, ovoid. It loses all its properties, all its features, meaning the surfaces and the borders. Everything will be lost when it is distended, and even the situation or the location of the bladder also will vary in accordingly when it is full and when it is empty. Otherwise, when it is empty, it is situated in the true pelvis anteriorly. So behind the bladder, we have rectum in males and the vagina as well as the uterus in females. The size of the bladder varies in size according to the amount of urine which is going to fill inside. So when it is full, it extends into the abdomen. Almost it reaches till the umbilicus sometimes. So and loses all its features and becomes ovoid in shape. So the capacity of the urinary bladder is like in males it is around 120 to 320 ml, and when it is 220 ml, when it is reaches 220 ml, the desired to maturation will begin. Then the threshold, the maximum threshold is said to be around 500 ml. The referred pain when the bladder is full is felt in the lower part of the anterior abdominal wall, as well as the perineum, and also in the penis. The position of the bladder. So when it is empty, it is located within the pelvis. When it is distended, it reaches umbilicus or even higher than that. So this is just to understand the position of the urinary bladder in male and female. So this one is the male pelvis and this one is the female pelvis. So you can note that in both the cases, it is located in the true pelvis. You can see the symphysis pubis here. Okay, so it is just lying behind the symphysis pubis, or just the apex of the bladder is present near to the symphysis pubis. You can see that. And in female pelvis, you can see just behind the urinary bladder there is vagina. And in males, it is the rectum. Coming to the features, anatomical features, what it has. Okay. So it has got an apex, a neck, a base, and surfaces, and of course borders also. So the apex is directed downwards and attached to the median umbilical ligament. The median umbilical ligament is the remnant of the the fetal life, that is urachus, and it is covered with peritoneum, and then it is called as median umbilical fold. The neck is situated lower, and it is a constricted part in male, and it is located or situated on the base of the prostate, whereas in female, it is directly resting on the pelvic fascia. The base of the urinary bladder, also known as the fundus or the posterior surface, is directed backwards. The surfaces are being two inferolateral surfaces, one on the right and one on the left, and the one superior surface and one posterior surface, or the base. So you can see in this picture, this is a common picture, commonly seen picture in many of the textbooks. You can see this is the superior surface, and here is the apex, which is connected to the median umbilical ligament, and this is the right inferolateral surface, whereas the left one is not seen in this picture. The posterior surface or the base and neck is below here. Okay, and then we have the two lateral borders here, and the one anterior border is here. There are four borders, two lateral borders, one anterior border, and one posterior border. The two lateral borders are being the will separate the superior surface from the inferolateral surfaces. The anterior border is present at the meeting of two inferolateral surfaces, whereas the posterior border is formed by a line joining the points of entry of uterus. Coming to its relations, even though the urinary bladder is a subperitoneal organ, so we have some peritoneal relations to be understood here. So it is lying below the peritoneal cavity, so we call it as subperitoneal structure. If it is behind, then we call it as retroperitoneal structure. So in males, the peritoneum is covering the or related to the urinary bladder only in its upper part of the posterior surface, as well as the whole of the superior surface. Whereas in females, the peritoneum is covering only the superior surface except a small part near its posterior border. So you can see in this picture here. So this is the left one is the male pelvis and the right one is the female pelvis. So you can see the whole superior surface of the urinary bladder is covered by peritoneum, and also a part of the upper part of the posterior surface is also related with the peritoneum here. Whereas in the female pelvis or the female urinary bladder, only the superior surface is covered. That too, a small portion near its posterior end is not covered with the peritoneum. So in both the cases, there are two pouches being formed near the posterior relations here. So one in the female, in the male body, it is the rectovesical pouch, or rectum and vesicle. The pouch in between the rectum and vesicle, or the bladder, is the rectovesical pouch. This pouch is called as rectovesical pouch. Whereas in females, it is the bladder and the uterus. So it is called as utrovesical or the vesico-uterine pouch. So in this picture, you can also see the recto-uterine pouch, or also known as the Douglas pouch of Douglas, or the Douglas pouch in female, very, very special for the female body. So the same picture once again. So here you can clearly see the posterior part of the superior surface in female urinary bladder is not covered by peritoneum. Instead, it is forming vesico-uterine pouch here. So whereas in female, in male, it is the whole superior surface as well as the upper part of the posterior surface is covered by the peritoneum. Coming to the apex. The apex is directly, or it's in connection with the umbilicus. Okay, it is connected to the umbilicus with the help of median umbilical ligament. You can see here the median umbilical ligament. It is the remnant of the urachus. You can see this is in the there is a patent urachus. You can see here. Once again, the same picture it's a female body. Coming to the relations of the base. In males, the base is having two relations, that is upper part and lower part. Okay, the upper part is related to the rectovesical pouch, so in which the intestines are intestines, and there is the small intestine and as well as the large intestine are located. And in lower part, it is the base is related with the rectum as well as the seminal vesicles in males. In females, it is only the uterine cervix as well as the vagina, anterior wall of the vagina, uterine cervix as well as the anterior wall of vagina. You can see here, this is the rectovesical pouch here. So in that, we'll have sigmoid colon as well as the coils of the ileum will reach up to here. Okay, and the posteriorly, you can see here the lower part, the seminal vesicles are present, and then behind that we have the rectum, anterior wall of the rectum is present here. Whereas in females, you can see here the bladder posterior wall or the base, okay, is related with the vagina, anterior wall of the vagina, as well as the cervix part, as well as the cervix. Coming to the relations of the neck. The neck is lying around 3 to 4 centimeters behind the pubic symphysis and above the pelvic outlet or the pelvic diaphragm, what we can say. So it is the neck is a location where the internal urethral orifice is located, or we can say the opening to the urethra. Opening to the urethra. Internal urethral orifice is nothing but the opening of the urethra. Then in males, the neck is resting on the base of the prostate. In females, it is resting on the pelvic fascia around the urethra. So after the neck, it is continuing further as the urethra itself. So in infants, the internal urethral orifice lies above the level of pubic symphysis, or at least near the superior border. It's a developmental changes. So in this picture, we can see the pelvic fascia here, and this is the neck of the bladder, okay, and which is continuing further as the urethra. So this much part is concerned as the pelvic fascia, where it includes the levator ani and the fascia which is covering the obturator internus muscle. So these two will together named as the pelvic fascia here. Coming to the relations of the surfaces, the superior surface. In males, the superior surface is covered with peritoneum, and it is separated by the sigmoid colon as well as the ileum. In females, the superior surface is covered by peritoneum, except a small part near its posterior border, okay, where the vesico-uterine pouch is being formed. Okay, so there we'll find the supravaginal part of the cervix being related, as well as the formation of the vesicouterine pouch. You can see here. So the superior surface is covered by peritoneum, and sigmoid colon as well as the coils of ileum are present in the male pelvis. Whereas in the female pelvis, we can see the superior surface of the bladder is covered by peritoneum and formation of the vesicouterine pouch, and then we have the the uterus, okay, the cervix of the uterus as well as the body of the uterus also. Coming to the relations of the inferolateral surfaces. The inferolateral surfaces are completely devoid of peritoneum. There is no peritoneal relation at all. Okay, as the bladder is the subperitoneal structure, the inferolateral surfaces are not having any relation with the peritoneum. So both the inferolateral surfaces will meet in the front to form the anterior border. In males, the pubis as well as the puboprostatic ligaments and the levator ani and obturator internus are related with the inferolateral surfaces. In females, the pubis, levator ani, and obturator internus are related. Like instead of puboprostatic ligaments, the females will have pubovesical ligaments. So here you can see it's a male, male pelvis picture. Okay, it's because you can see the puboprostatic ligaments of both sides. Okay, so it attaches with the lower part of the internal aspect of the pubis to the neck of the bladder. So puboprostatic ligament. Okay, then we have the anterior border which is facing towards the symphysis pubis here. So this is just to see the perineal muscles here. And other two, one important feature to be remembered in the superior as well as on the sides of the urinary bladder here. Okay, this particular foci are formed by the peritoneum actually. So peritoneal covering forms a foci when the bladder is empty. So these foci are visible only when the bladder is empty. So there are 5 foci. Okay, there are 6 foci. Okay, so one extra in females. 2 supravesical foci, then 2 paravesical foci, and 1 rectovesical foci in males, and utrovesical foci in females. So in this picture you can see, so these are the supravesical foci. Okay, this picture is when the bladder is empty. Okay, when the bladder is empty, then only we can see this kind of peritoneal foci. Other when it is full, we cannot see this actually. Okay, so this is the supravesical foci, and the paravesical foci you can see in the coronal section of the pelvis. This is not the exact coronal section. Okay, but when you take the coronal section along the bladder, we can see the peritoneal foci, that is the paravesical foci. These are the paravesical foci. On the sides of the urinary bladder, we have a empty space, that is the paravesical foci. So in a distended bladder, the inferolateral surfaces will be converted into an anterior surface. Okay, whereas the posterior superior surface will be related with the peritoneum, and the lower part of the whole urinary bladder is coming to the towards the anterior abdominal wall. So this helps for the surgical approach to extract the bladder stones sometimes. And these are the structures where the bladder is actually resting. So it's called as bladder bed. Just like stomach bed, we have bladder bed also. So where the bladder is resting. So that is the subpubic symphysis and the body of pubis, as well as the fascia of levator ani, as well as the obturator internus, and even the rectum and the vagina in females, and the base of the prostate gland in males. So these structures are together forming the bladder bed. Then there is one space of red CS. Okay, so it's actually along the around the neck and the inferolateral surfaces of the urinary bladder. Okay, it's called as the retropubic space. Okay, it is behind the pubis actually. So it's called as the retropubic space between the anterolateral pelvic wall and the sides of the bladder as well as the prostate gland. So this allows distension of the bladder as well as helps for the surgical approach. So between the anterolateral, surfaces of the bladder and the anterolateral surfaces of the what do you call the pubis, as well as the sides of the bladder. Coming to the supports or the ligaments of the bladder. Okay, so the bladder has got a group of ligaments here. So two sets of ligaments, that is the true ligaments and the false ligaments. The true ligaments are 9 in number and false ligaments are 5 in number. The true ligaments are nothing but the condensed pelvic fascia. Okay, so they are like lateral true ligaments, 2 in number, 2 laterals. Okay, and there are lateral puboprostatic ligaments. In female, it will be replaced with the pubovesical ligaments, and there are medial puboprostatic ligaments, which are replaced by pubovesical ligaments, medial pubovesical ligaments in females, and there is a medial umbilical ligament, and there are 2 posterior ligaments. So all these are nothing but the condensed pelvic fascia itself. So, but except the median umbilical ligament, which is nothing but the remnant of the urachus. Then the false ligaments are 5 in number, which are nothing but the peritoneal folds, and they don't have any role in the support of the urinary bladder. Okay, so the first one is the median umbilical fold. The median umbilical fold is nothing but the peritoneal fold, which is covering the median umbilical ligament. Okay, the peritoneum, the layer of the peritoneum which is covering the median umbilical ligament itself is known as the median umbilical fold. And there are 2 medial umbilical fold. There is a difference. The median is in the midline, along the midline, and the medial is on the just sides on the outside the median plane. So they are the medial umbilical ligament. So they are said as medial because next to that we have lateral false ligaments also. Okay. So or the lateral umbilical folds also. So the medial umbilical folds are nothing but the obliterated umbilical arteries, and they are covered by the peritoneal layers. So that's why they are known as medial umbilical folds, and they don't have any role in the support of the urinary bladder. And there are lateral false ligaments and there are posterior false ligaments also. All are peritoneal folds only. So in this picture, we can just see the median umbilical ligament, which is attached to the apex here. Okay, median umbilical ligament. Okay, and when the same structure is covered by peritoneum, that peritoneal fold we call it as median umbilical fold. And we can see the medial umbilical ligaments on either side. Okay, 1 and 2. So they are nothing but the obliterated umbilical arteries. So here we have 2 sets of puboprostatic ligament. This is the medial puboprostatic ligament and lateral puboprostatic ligament. Medial and lateral puboprostatic ligament. And there is a lateral true ligament also we can see here, which is attaching to the tendinous arch. Okay, tendinous arch of the pelvic fascia. Coming to the each explanation of each ligaments, you can see the lateral true ligaments will attach from the sides of the bladder to the tendinous arch of the pelvic fascia, and the lateral puboprostatic ligament will attach the anterior end of the tendinous arch to upper part of the prostatic sheath. So you can see here. So this is the anterior end of the tendinous arch is reaching up to here. This is the tendinous arch. This anterior end, this is the posterior end, and from anterior arch to the prostate gland, that is the lateral puboprostatic ligament. Then coming to the medial puboprostatic ligament, which is attaching back of the pubic bone to the near the pubic symphysis to the prostatic sheath. Okay, so it attaches from the pubis to the prostate. Then median umbilical ligament, it is nothing but the remnant of urachus, and the posterior ligament will attach from base of the bladder to the lateral pelvic wall. The posterior ligament is attaching from the base, that is the posterior surface. Base is nothing but the posterior surface, from posterior surface to the lateral pelvic wall. Coming to the interior of bladder. So when the bladder is empty, so we can really make out the irregular mucosal folds. there are irregular mucosal folds seen in an empty bladder. When the bladder is distended, these folds will disappear. But the mucosal folds are absent in one particular region of the bladder, which is known as trigone. So in the trigone, it's a triangle. It's a small triangular area over the base of the bladder inside. Okay. So here the mucosa is smooth due to the firm attachment of the muscular cord. So meaning there is no mucosal folds seen in this particular area. So the apex trigone, as the name suggests, it is triangular in shape. Okay, the apex is directed downwards and forwards, and towards it is pointed towards, or it will open at the internal or urethral orifice, or you can say the apex is ending at the internal urethral orifice. So there is a slight elevated area on the trigone posterior to the urethral orifice. It's found only in males. It is called as uvula vesicae. Uvula vesicae. So as it is found only in males, it is because of the impression created by the prostate gland itself. Okay, impression created by the prostate gland. That is why a slight elevation will be seen there. Then coming to the base of the trigone. The base of the trigone is formed by an interureteric ridge. It's also known as bar of Mercier. Okay, the ridge is extending beyond the ureteric openings. So of course, the base of the trigone and the two ends, we have the opening of the ureters, or the ureters will come inside the urinary bladder at the base of the trigone. Yesterday we learned that. So the ridge, the interureteric ridge will extend beyond the ureteric openings, and that extension is known as ureteric folds. It's just a mucosal fold. On the posterolateral angles, we have the ureteric openings. That is at the base itself. Okay, the two ends of the base. We call it as posterolateral angles. So these openings will become 2.5 centimeters apart when the bladder is empty, and 5 centimeter apart when the bladder is distended. So you can see in this picture here, okay, these are the openings of the ureters on the posterolateral angles of the trigone. Okay, so this area is, we call it as ureteric fold. Okay, this area we call it as the ureteric fold. Okay, and the line which is connecting the two openings of the ureters inside the in the trigone, we call it as the interureteric crest or the bridge. Interureteric crest or the bridge. And you can see the apex is opening or ending at the internal urethral orifice. This is the internal urethral orifice. Okay, this picture is more clear. Okay, you can see this is the internal interureteric crest or bridge. Okay, and this is the apex of the trigone. Okay, and these are the openings of the ureters. Coming to the microscopic structure of the urinary bladder. So it has got, from inside to outside, we have mucous membrane or the mucosa, then submucosa, then the muscular coat, as well as the serosa outside. So the mucous membrane is actually having a specialized epithelium. We call it as urothelium, and it is nothing but transitional epithelium. It is a transitional epithelium. And it is devoid of muscularis mucosae, meaning there is no smooth muscle layer in the mucosa. And deeper to that, we have the or outside we have the submucosa, which is formed by the loose areolar tissue. But this submucosa is usually absent in the trigone. Coming to the muscular coat, the muscular coat is having a very special muscle for the urinary bladder, which is called as detrusor muscle. It is actually a three-layered smooth muscle, having an outer longitudinal layer and a middle circular layer and an inner longitudinal layer. The middle circular layer actually forms a sphincter around the neck of the bladder, which we call it as the sphincter vesicae. Sphincter vesicae, or the internal urethral sphincter, Then we have the serosa, which is formed by the derived from the peritoneum, which is covering the superior surface of the bladder. So in this picture, you can see here the serosa is having outside here the serosa, and then we have the muscular layer, that is the detrusor muscle layer. Then we have the submucosa, and finally we have the mucosa, that is the transitional epithelium. The mucosa of the urinary bladder is having the transitional epithelium. So when you go for urinary examination, you will see that there is like epithelial cells absent, or number of epithelial cells seen in one particular cubic centimeters. So it is usually these epithelial cells will be eroded and seen in the urine. Yeah. So usually the epithelial cells will be eroded because of any kind of infection or any kind of injury due to the stones. And also it is understood that the erosion of the transition epithelium will lead to formation of urinary calculus or the vesical calculus. So bladder will form stones because of the erosion of the transitional epithelium. So there's a small video regarding the transition epithelium. So how it exactly, it's said to be the transition epithelium. So the transitional epithelium in an empty bladder looks like cuboidal cells. Okay, it looks like cuboidal epithelial cells. But when the bladder is full, they tend to change their shape. They tend to transform their shape into squamous epithelium. Okay, in a full bladder, it looks like squamous epithelium. So that is the reason why it is said as transitional epithelium. So the bladder is actually a contracting and relaxing structure. So because of that, the cells will not get damaged. Okay, even though it is contracting and relaxing, the cells will not get damaged because of this peculiar property of the cells. Coming to the blood supply of the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is supplied by the superior and inferior vesical arteries, which are actually branches of the internal iliac arteries, and also by the obturator artery and inferior gluteal artery. So in females, we have even uterine artery and vaginal artery supplying the urinary bladder. The superior and inferior vesical arteries are very important here. And coming to the venous drainage, so there is a venous plexus being formed near the inferior lateral surface of the urinary bladder. We call it as the vesical venous plexus, and it ultimately drains to the internal iliac veins. Coming to the lymphatic drainage, the anterior group of lymph nodes will drain from the apex and the inferior lateral surfaces. There are intermediate group of lymph nodes which drain from the base as well as superior surface, and there are posterior group of lymph nodes which drain from the base. And all these three groups, anterior, intermediate, and posterior group of lymph nodes, it will finally drain to the external iliac lymph nodes. Coming to the nerve supply of the urinary bladder, it's quite important to understand the nerve supply of the urinary bladder, because most of the clinical conditions will depend on the nerve supply or the nerve innervations. Okay, so the vesical plexus is actually derived from the inferior hypogastric plexus, having parasympathetic innervation from S2, S3, and S4, also known as the nervi erigentis. So they are motor to the detrusor muscle and inhibitory to the sphincter vesicae. And the sympathetic innervation is by the T11, T12, L1, and L2. They are inhibitory to detrusor and motor to sphincter vesicae. Meaning the parasympathetic innervation will take care of contracting the detrusor muscle and relaxing the sphincter vesicae. So when a person is actually emptying the bladder or urinating or micturating, it's usually the parasympathetic nerves will are active. So because of the parasympathetic stimulation, the detrusor muscle will contract, and it will at the same time the sphincter vesicae, which is also involuntary, it comes under the autonomic innervations, so it will be relaxing. So then the urine will flow through the urethra. But the external urethral sphincter is under the control of spinal nerves, that is the S2, S3, S4, but they are voluntary. And the sympathetic innervation are inhibitory to detrusor, so they help the bladder to relax when the urine is inflowing, or urine is coming from the ureters or from the kidneys. Okay, so when the bladder is filling, the sympathetic is actually making the detrusor muscle to relax, and also it is holding, or it is contracting the sphincter of SIK to hold the urine inside the urinary bladder, or it is allowing the urine to fill inside the urinary bladder. So you can see here the sphincter of SIK are present around the neck of the bladder here. Okay, and sphincter urethrae, that is the external urethral sphincter, is present at the apex of the, or next to the prostate gland, where the urethra is in the pelvic perineal body, or we can say the pelvic diaphragm, okay, or the perineal membrane. And the somatic innervation is actually by the pudendal nerve to the sphincter urethrae. Okay, so the somatic innervation in the urinary system is to the sphincter urethrae by the pudendal nerve, once again from the S2, S3, and S4, and it is voluntary. So even though the sympathetic is actually the parasympathetic innervation is relaxing the sphincter of SIK, the sphincter urethrae is under the voluntary control, so it can withhold the act of micturition for a while. So coming to the so that was about the anatomical aspect of the urinary bladder, and some clinical information. So the urine can be stagnating, or we can call it as urinary retention is possible in the urinary bladder because of many conditions, or like any kind of obstruction in the urethra. Okay, will lead to the urinary retention. The obstruction in the urethra may be because of many reasons, like in males, it is the prostatomegaly, or in or the fibrosis, or the any fibrosis due to as a result of any kind of chronic infection, as we say the stricture of urethra. Okay, and the calculi in bladder are also seen. Okay, the stone formation in the bladder, and cystitis. The word cystitis refers to the infection of the urinary bladder, inflammatory conditions, and in females it is quite common. Okay, then we have the vesicovaginal fistula, once again the congenital anomaly. Okay, and the neoplasms, and some other congenital malformations like agenesis of bladder. Okay, and that is improper the growth of the urinary bladder, and the ectopia vesicae. Ectopia vesicae is one of the serious condition, critical condition, where the anterior wall of the urinary bladder is not being developed, or the anterior wall of the lower abdominal region is also, itself is not formed sometimes. Okay, or the both the pubis will not be seen in the picture itself. Okay, both the pubis will be absent. So at that time, what happens is the bladder will come out of the anterior abdominal wall, and it is seen outside. So ectopia vesicae. Then the hourglass bladder and rectovesical fistula. Hourglass bladder is also once again a developmental anomaly where a septum is actually formed in between the walls of the urinary bladder. So this is a picture of the X-ray showing the calculus inside the urinary bladder. You can see two calculus are present here. And you can see this is a large calculus being seen inside the urinary bladder. So a large calculus here. And this is a picture of ectopia vesicae. You can see here ectopia vesicae, and it's a picture after surgical repair. And this is the hourglass bladder. You can see the septum is forming in different ways actually, and this is exactly the hourglass bladder. So the septum is seen here itself. Okay. These are the other possibilities in the congenital malformation. So this picture says about, or depicts about you can see the fistula being formed between the bladder as well as the rectum. You can see the rectum is actually opening into the bladder here. Okay, near the neck. Okay, so this is the rectovesical fistula. rectovesical fistula. In females, you can see here in the female pelvis, you can see rectovaginal fistula or vesicovaginal, vesicovaginal fistula, not the rectum. Okay, vesico is the bladder and vagina. So a fistula is a tract being formed in the bladder as well as the vagina. Vesicovaginal fistula. Some other clinical, anatomical points we can remember here. That is the rupture of the distended bladder by injuries of the abdominal wall, and chronic obstruction due to the prostatomegaly or stricture will lead to the hypertrophy of the bladder. Then urinary incontinence, atonic bladder, dribbling incontinence, and automatic bladder. These are the conditions coming under the neurological deficits. Okay. So this completes the anatomy of the urinary bladder. Can I continue with the urethra?
Yes, sir. You can continue, sir. We'll keep the discussion session after that. After you complete the topic.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So next we'll start with the urethra. So urethra is actually basically a tube which is connecting neck of the bladder to the exterior, meaning outside, and it is beginning at the base of the bladder and ends with an external opening in the perineum. So in males it is reaching till the tip of the penis, whereas in females it is opening in the perineum itself. So urethra, we find two, based on the gender, we have two urethras, that is the male urethra and the female urethra. So first we'll see the anatomical, aspects of the male urethra. So male urethra is actually a membranous canal, okay, which actually transmits urine as well as the seminal fluid. Okay, that is a peculiarity of the male urethra. It is carrying both urine as well as the seminal fluids. It's having a length of approximately 18 to 20 centimeters or around 8 inches in length, and having a tortuous course. Okay, having a tortuous or a S-shaped course. Okay, so the shape or the course shape is actually S-shaped when the penis is flaccid. Okay, when the penis is flaccid, it looks S-shaped, or when the penis is erect, it looks J-shaped. So you can see here, this is the urinary bladder here. So from the neck of the bladder, we can see the ureter. In the neck of the bladder, you can see the ureter is beginning here. Sorry, urethra is beginning here. Okay, so it is crossing the prostate gland and reaching the penis. Okay, and then opening in the tip of the penis or the glands of the penis. Okay, this is somewhat like S-shaped actually. Okay, so because here in this picture, the penis is flaccid. You can see this is the male urethra. Okay, once again. Okay, from the neck of the bladder. Okay, and the prostate gland, then the pelvic fascia, then the penis. Okay, and here it is the urinary bladder, and the from the neck immediately it is crossing the pelvic fascia and then opening in the perineum itself, having a very short course in female pelvis. Extent or location, the urethra, the male urethra is extending from the internal urethral orifice, that is in the neck of the bladder, till the external urethral orifice, that is in the tip of the penis. You can see here, this is the external internal urethral orifice, okay, at the neck of the bladder, okay. Then we have the external urethral orifice here. Coming to the parts of the male urethra. So the male urethra is understood in terms of like three parts. The part which is traveling in the prostate gland, we call it as the prostatic part. the part which is traveling next to that, a very small distance in the pelvic fascia, that is the membranous part. Okay, that is and next, when it is entering inside the penis, we call it as the spongy or the penile urethra. The penile urethra is also having two parts, that is the bulbar as well as the penile part. Okay, so the prostatic part is having a length of 3 centimeters, and in transverse section it looks semilunar. Okay, it is having a shape of semilunar in transverse section, whereas the membranous urethra is actually traveling in the sphincter urethra, in the pelvic diaphragm. Okay, so it is having a length of around 1.5 to 2 centimeters, and it is star or the stellate shaped. Okay, then in transverse section we can see it as star shape or the stellate shaped. And the spongy or the penile urethra is traveling in the bulb as well as the corpus spongiosum of this penis, and it is the lengthiest among the three. Okay, so it is having 15 centimeters in length. In transverse section it looks slit shaped, vertical slit. Okay, at the external urethral orifice. So these are the transverse section in the prostate, and the prostatic part looks semilunar shape. The membranous part looks star or stellate shape. In the spongious part, it is horizontal slit, and at the external urethral orifice, we have the vertical slit. It leads like vertical slit. So you can see here. So after from the neck of the bladder, we have the prostatic part of the urethra. Then we have the small membranous part of the urethra. Then we have the penile urethra, the lengthiest one. Okay, so the penile urethra is having two parts. One is the fixed part, which is called as the bulbous urethra or the bulbar urethra, and the free part is called as the penile urethra. Once again, same pictures. Okay, to show the prostatic part, and the membranous part, and then the penile part. Coming to the prostatic part or the prostatic urethra, it is beginning at the internal urethral orifice and moves vertically down. Okay, in the anterior part of the prostate, and having a length of 3 centimeters, that is 2.5 to 3 centimeters, and it is the widest and the most dilatable part of the urethra in males. Okay, it is the most widest and the most dilatable part. Okay, it becomes narrow at the junction or at the joining part of the membranous urethra. So where it is going to continue as membranous urethra, it becomes narrow. And in transverse section, it looks semilunar shaped. So in this picture, you can see the green color marked area is the prostatic urethra. So there are some internal features to be remembered in the prostatic urethra. So the posterior wall only has some important features here. Okay, the posterior wall, or it's also known as the floor of the prostatic urethra. So it is having a small ridge of mucous membrane, which is called as urethral crest or the veru montana. Okay, it's called as the urethral crest or the veru montana. And also another feature we need to understand here is colliculus seminalis. So it's a small elevation on the urethral crest itself. So this colliculus seminalis will give a slit. It is having a slit in that. Okay, for the prostatic utricle opening, which opens into the urethra. So on either side of the prostatic utricle opening, we have the two other openings for the ejaculatory ducts. So on the colliculus seminalis, we have three openings being seen. Okay, so one middle opening for the prostatic utricle, and the two other openings on the side for the ejaculatory ducts. Coming to the prostatic sinuses, so along the side of the urethral crest, along the side of the veru montanum or the urethral crest, there are around 20 to 30 small openings being seen. So they are for the prostatic gland openings. So you can see here. So this is the prostatic urethra, and the middle elevated part you can see here. This is the mucosal elevation, that is the urethral crest. Okay, this one is the urethral crest, and this urethral crest is again elevated in the middle part, that is called as the prostatic colliculus semianalis. This is the colliculus semianalis. In the colliculus semianalis, we have the three openings. The middle opening, middle slit-like opening is for the prostatic utricle, and two other opening on either side for the ejaculatory ducts. And on the side of the urethral crest, we have small openings of the prostatic glands. So this is a simple picture. Okay, so you can see this is how the urethral crest will be, and two openings in the middle, and the prostatic sinuses on both sides. Coming to the prostatic urethra. Okay. The prostatic utricle, sorry. Okay, the prostatic utricle is nothing but a blind sac having 6 mm long inside the prostate. Okay, it is directed upwards and backwards inside the median, between the median and the posterior lobes of the prostate gland. It is considered to be the male uterus or the male vagina. Okay, so it is said to. There are so many explanations. Okay, let's not dig much into that. Okay. So it is considered as homologous part of female uterus and the vagina. So you can see in this picture. So this small blunt pouch-like structure, which is directed upwards and backwards between the median and the posterior lobe, it's called as the prostatic utricle. Prostatic utricle. So next is about the membranous urethra. So the membranous urethra is actually directed downwards and forwards. It is entering into the deep perineal space. Okay, then it pierces the perineal membrane and reaches around 2.5 centimeter below and behind the symphysis pubis. So it is the narrowest and the least dilatable part. Why it is least dilatable part? Because this particular membranous urethra is surrounded by the external urethral sphincter. Okay, this particular membranous urethra is surrounded by the external urethral sphincter. It's a strong musculature. That's why it is the least dilatable part. You can see here, this is the membranous urethra. So in this picture, you can see the prostatic utricle. Okay, urethral crest is present here. So elevated part in the middle, that is the prostatic utricle is here, and the prostatic sinus you can see here. Okay, and colliculus semianalis. In the middle we have the prostatic utricle and two openings for the ejaculatory ducts. And here you can see the membranous urethra. So immediately below the prostatic urethra, we have the membranous urethra. Narrowest part you can see, it's the narrow down here, and here it is dilated, and where here it is narrow. Again, it is dilated in further course. Okay, and this is the another section. Okay, here you can see the membranous urethra being present in the pelvic diaphragm. Okay, pelvic diaphragm. So it crosses the pelvic diaphragm to reach the bulbous part of the penis. So the membranous urethra is actually surrounded by the sphincter urethrae or the external urethral sphincter. The internal urethral sphincter is named as sphincter vesicae, whereas the external urethral sphincter is named as the sphincter urethrae. So it is actually on either side of the gland, the membranous urethra, we have the bulbourethral glands of Cowper or Cowper's gland. Okay, bulbourethral gland of Cowper. So one on either side. But the thing is, the ducts of these glands will open into the penile urethra. Okay, the ducts of these glands will not open in the membranous urethra. Instead, they open into the penile urethra. But you can find the urethral gland openings inside the membranous urethra. Okay, so you can see in this picture there is the bulbourethral gland on both sides. Okay, bulbourethral gland, but the glands are opening into the bulbar part of the urethra. You can see. Okay, this is the membranous part of the urethra. Okay, but the glands ducts will open into the bulbar part of the urethra, the Cowper's gland. Coming to the penile urethra or the spongy urethra. Okay, so after entering into the penis, it has a course of forward and upward in the bulb of penis. which is nothing but the fixed part, or we can call it as bulbar or the bulbous urethra. And then further it bends down in front of the pubic symphysis to continue as the lower part. It is the actually entering into the corpus spongiosum of penis. Then we call it as the free part or the penile urethra. And this penile urethra will terminate at the external urethral orifice at the tip of the glans penis. So you can see here, after membranous urethra, it is entering into the bulbous part of the penis. So we call it as the it is downwards and forwards. It is forwards and upwards also. Okay, it's forwards and upwards. This part is the fixed part of the penile urethra. We call it as the bulbous urethra. Then further, it is directed vertically downwards. Okay, that is the penile urethra. That is the free part. It is present in the corpus spongiosum of the penis. This part is the corpus spongiosum of the penis here. So in penile urethra, we can find some dilatations. So one dilatation near the beginning of the urethra, which we call it as intrabulbar fossa. So which actually bulges into the floor as well as the sides. Okay, this particular dilatation is actually bulging into the floor and the sides. Whereas another dilatation is present near the glans penis, which is called as the navicular fossa, which usually bulges into the roof as well as sides of the urethra. Okay, roof as well as sides. So two dilatations, one is the intrabulbar fossa, other one is the navicular fossa. The external urethral orifice is the narrowest part of the male urethra. The external urethral orifice is the narrowest part of the male urethra. So it is actually like a sagittal slit, actually a vertical slit. It's actually like a vertical slit having a length of around 6 millimeter, and it is bounded by the labiums. It is bounded by two small lips-like structure called as labiums. So you can see here, this is the dilated part here. This is the intrabulbar fossa. This one is the intrabulbar fossa, and here is the navicular fossa near the tip of or the glans penis. Okay, inside the glans penis we have the navicular fossa, and the bulbous part we have the intrabulbar fossa. So this particular dilatation is towards the floor as well as the sides, and this dilatation is towards the roof as well as the sides. Coming to the openings inside the penile urethra. So the ducts of bulbourethral glands will open into the fixed part of the urethra, and the urethral gland of Littré will open into the anterior part of the penile urethra. So there are two sets of openings. One is the opening of the ducts of bulbourethral gland, usually happens inside the fixed part of the urethra, whereas the bulbourethral glands of Cowper, they are present on either side of the membranous urethra, but the ducts are opening into the fixed part of the penile urethra, and the urethral glands of Littré are opening in the anterior part of the penile urethra, that is in the free part actually. And we can find some other spaces in the penile urethra, that is the lacunae of Morgagni. They are the small pit-like recesses, and the lacunae of Magna or sinus of Guerin. Okay, these are it's present in the it's the largest lacuna present in the roof of the navicular fossa, and they receive the opening of the urethral glands. So lacunae of Morgagni as well as the lacunae magna or the sinus of Guerin. So you can see here the lacunae in the roof of the navicular fossa, that is the lacunae magna, and then there are small pit-like recesses seen in the penile urethra, that is the urethral lacunae or the lacunae of Morgagni, where the opening of the urethral glands are seen. Coming to the sphincter urethrae, or first we'll see the internal urethral sphincter, or also known as the sphincter vesicae. Okay, it is involuntary. It is completely under the control of autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nerves from the lower thoracic and upper lumbar will control this particular sphincter vesicae, and it actually controls the neck of the bladder and the prostatic urethra above the level of ejaculatory ducts. And it is abundant with the smooth muscles, elastic and collagen fibers. This internal urethral sphincter, or the sphincter SAK, is formed by the smooth muscles, elastic and collagen fibers. The external urethral sphincter, also known as the sphincter urethrae, it is voluntary in action, supplied by the perineal branch of the pudendal nerve, that is from the S2, S3, and S4 segments, and it is actually formed by the striated muscles, and it controls a membranous urethra and helps in voluntary holding of urine. So this is a small video regarding how the micturition reflex acts.
The micturition reflex involves impulses traveling from the urinary bladder to the sacral region of the spinal cord and from the sacral region of the spinal cord back to the bladder. It is coordinated by neurons in the spinal cord and can be influenced by signals from the brain. When the urinary bladder becomes stretched, there is an increase in the frequency of action potentials carried from the bladder wall to the sacral region of the spinal cord. In response, parasympathetic neurons from the spinal cord to the bladder are activated, and this causes the smooth muscle on the bladder wall to contract. The sensory signals to the sacral region of the spinal cord also stimulate ascending pathways to the pons and cerebrum, which results in a conscious desire to urinate. If urination is not convenient at the time, the brain sends impulses down the spinal cord to inhibit the micturition reflex. Impulses carried via somatic motor neurons keep the external urinary sphincter contracted, which also prevents urination. When urination is desired, signals from the brain stimulate the micturition reflex. The brain also decreases action potentials in the somatic motor neurons to relax the external urinary sphincter.
When the bladder fills with
So usually the initiation of micturition is possible because of three different level of actions. One is the relaxation of the pelvic floor locally. These are the local actions what we can observe, and the relaxation of the sphincter urethrae and the contraction of the detrusor muscle. So these three actions will initiate the act of micturition. Of course, these three actions are involved with the higher center, higher mental, the impulses from the cerebrum as well as from the pons. Coming to the vascular supply, it is the prostatic branches of the inferior vesicle and middle ductal arteries, and the dorsal artery of the penis, and arteries of the bulb of penis. So these the arteries which are supplying to the neighboring structures wherever the urethra is passing. So those arteries only will take care of the blood supply of the urethra also, as well as the venous drainage also. Coming to the nerve supply of urethra, the passenger nerve supply is by the pelvic plexus made of S2, S3, and S4 roots to form pelvic splanchnic nerves. And the sympathetic supply is by the T12 to L2 segments. And the somatic supply is once again by the pudendal nerve from the sacral plexus. So it is sensory and motor to the external urethral sphincter. So meaning the pudendal nerve is completely in control of the external urethral sphincter. The lymphatics is by the internal and external iliac group of lymph nodes, as well as the superficial inguinal group of lymph nodes. Some clinical aspects. Already I mentioned about the ectopia vesicae and epispadiasis and hypospadiasis. So these two are very specific to the urinary urethra. So hypospadiasis means the opening of the urethra, external opening of the urethra will be seen below the penis, and the epispadiasis means the opening of the external urethral opening will be seen above the on the superior aspect of the penis. And urethritis is the infection of the urethra, and the rupture of the urethra is also seen because of any kind of injury or internally because of the passage of any kind of stones. Okay, And stricture of urethra usually seen after an injury when the injured area is healed. So it gets fibrosed, and the lumen becomes very narrow. So it is called a stricture of urethra. So this is about the male urethra. So next we'll discuss about the female urethra. So female urethra is having length of 4 centimeters only. In some books you will even find 5 centimeters, 4 to 5 centimeters in length. Okay, and diameter of around 6 millimeters. And it is similar to the prostatic urethra of male because both are having the same kind of length. And the beginning is at the internal urethral orifice, that is near the neck of the bladder, and ends at the external urethral orifice in the vestibule of the female perineum. The course is internal from the internal urethral orifice. It is 5 centimeters behind the pubic symphysis and moves downwards and forwards and reaches the or it is related with the anterior wall of the vagina and pierces the urogenital diaphragm and opens in the external urethral orifice. You can see here. So this is the urogenital diaphragm, okay, and this is the opening just outside the urogenital diaphragm. So the upper part of the female urethra is crescentric in transverse section. The middle part is stellate, and lower part is in transverse in transverse section. It's a horizontal slit. And then at the external urethral orifice, it's a sagittal slit with 2 labiums. So in female urethra, there are some paraurethral glands of skin. These are nothing but the collection of mucus glands on one side of the upper part. They are considered to be homologous with the prostate gland of males. And the female urethra is considered to be more dilatable than the male urethra. Yeah, thank you. So this was about the anatomy of the urinary organs. If you have any questions, please, you can ask now.
The platform is open for discussion now. So any students who are having any doubts regarding today's session and also yesterday's session, you can kindly discuss it with sir. So one doubt which I received, you told about the maturation reflex controlled by the urethral sphincter.
Okay.
And you also mentioned that the ejaculatory ducts are actually getting opened into the prostate gland.
Yes.
Along with the seminal vesicle ducts. So during the act of sex or coitus,
okay,
as male urethra is having both urinary system and reproductive system controlled in the single urethral channel.
Yes.
So how this is actually getting controlled?
Okay, it's actually a kind of physiology question. Okay, anyways.
Yeah, I do understand, sir, but
okay. Can you repeat the question once again? Okay, during the act of sexual coitus, what if a person having the urge of micturition, what happens?
Yeah. How that is getting controlled, or who is actually controlling it?
It is actually at the the external urethral sphincter is present after the prostatic urethra. Okay, so the ejaculatory ducts are opening before the external urethral sphincter. Okay, so possibly at that time, the external urethral sphincter will be controlling both the urine as well as the seminal fluids. That's what I understand. And
okay.
yeah, I think without the micturition reflex being, if it is so, I think being executed, I don't think so. Ejaculation is going to be possible.
Okay, sir. Sir, can you explain the trigon of bladder once more?
Yeah, the trigone is okay. I'll take the slide. Okay, so the trigone is yeah, it's a trigone is a small triangular area on the base of the bladder. Okay, so it's actually you can see yeah. So in this picture you can clearly see here. So this particular part of the trigone doesn't have any mucosal folds. Okay, it won't be having any mucosal folds. Whereas unlike the other parts of the urinary other surfaces of the urinary bladder, which will have continuous mucosal folds. So the mucosal fold will be absent in this particular triangular area, which is present towards the base of the urinary bladder. And this triangle of the trigone is directed downwards. Okay, meaning the apex is directed downwards towards the internal urethral orifice. This is the opening of the urethra here. Okay, so internal urethral orifice, and the base is directed upwards, and the base is actually formed by a interureteric crest, meaning at the two ends of the base of the trigone, we have the openings of the ureters. So the line which connects these two openings, we call it as interureteric crest. And yeah, and this is the center of trigone here, and the trigone will actually is not having the layer of submucosa. Okay, and then we have yeah. So the two openings of the particular ureters in the two angles of the trigone is around 2.5 centimeter apart when the bladder is empty, and the bladder is distended, it is around 5 centimeters apart. Yeah, I think this information is okay.
Yes. Sir, one more question came.
Yeah.
For cases like Shukrameha,
Okay.
urine getting mixed up with semen,
Okay.
are there only physiological abnormalities or anatomical malformations are also there? If yes, kindly explain. Like Shukrameha is something physiological, or as any anatomical malformations also are present along?
No, I think there is no any anatomical malformation. It is just see the seminal fluid when it is mixing with the what do you call the urine. I think that's what Shukrameha is to be understood. There is no any anatomical what do you call deformity being seen there, I believe.
Okay, sir. Sir, one question from yesterday's session.
Okay.
Yesterday, when you showed the microscopic structure of kidney,
Okay.
the convoluted tubules, the distal convoluted tubules of the nephron,
Okay.
some were actually going nearby the inner calyx, some were shown nearby the cortex. So, are they uniformly distributed inside the kidney, or is there any difference in their positions?
Meaning, I didn't get the question. What is it?
In yesterday's microscopic structure of
Okay.
kidney,
Okay.
the position of nephrons are actually in one picture, one diagram. Position of nephron, two nephrons are shown in different positions. One
Okay.
nearby the base of the medulla, and one nearby the apex of the medulla.
Only the distal convoluted tubule.
Yeah.
Which picture? Okay. No, I have shown only this picture. My slide is visible?
No, sir.
Yesterday's is not visible, no?
No.
Okay. Yeah, this was the picture which I shown regarding the right.
Yeah, I hope another picture was also shown.
The one was just the picture of nephron. That's all. This is general part of the nephron.
Yeah. So is there any difference in position regarding the Henle's loop?
Henle's loop will be usually seen in the medulla itself. Only the the glomerulus as well as the distal cannulated tubule will reach to the the cortex of the kidney.
Okay, sir. Sir, one more doubt.
Huh.
Diseases which you told in the clinical anatomy of urethra,
Okay.
are they common for both males and females?
No, it is not common. Hypospadiasis and epispadiasis are only for the males. I told already specifically. It was only for the males. Even the stricture is also very rarely. I don't know. Stricture is possible in females or not. But in males, it is quite common because of the injury. And ectopic is a congenital anomaly. It can happen for both male and female.
Okay, sir. Sir, one more question.
Yeah.
Considering the concept of Vrika,
Okay.
Vasti, and Mutravaha Srotas,
Okay.
how can that be anatomically correlated?
Okay. See, it is Vrika. We don't have a direct reference or what they call direct definition to say it is kidney, or even we don't have a direct what you call very like scattered informations are available. See, the Mutrava Srotas, the whole altogether we can consider it as the whole KUB, okay, kidney, ureter, and bladder, as well as the urethra. Okay, the word basti is very specific for the anatomically. The word basti is very specific for the urinary bladder, because the word meaning of basti is something which is residing. So the urine is coming and residing in the urinary bladder for a while. So it is called as basti. Okay, but some in some contexts we even have references where the word basti should be understood as whole kidney, ureter, and bladder also. Okay, so contextual understanding is always better instead of sticking on to one word and one what you call translation or one correlation. So I would say contextually the basti word is taken for both all the whole urinary system. Even the Mutrava Srotas is also taken for the whole urinary system, and the word basti is sometimes taken alone for the urinary bladder itself. And the word vrukka is not clear. Okay, we don't have a direct or the clear understanding about vrukka to say it has kidney itself. Okay, but in Chakrapani's commentary, we can find one definition which says Vrukkau Kukshi Golakau. Okay, Kukshi Golakau, something which is round in Kukshi. That's what something which is globular. Golaka. Golaka means something which is rounded. So this is what we find in the Chakrapani's commentary. So that we can understand, and it is also said as Medovaha Sotamula. So the Rukka is considered here as the Medovahanam Rukko Mulam Vapavanascha. Okay, so Medova Sotamula is considered as the Rukka according to Charaka. So there we can consider the maybe Chakrapani meant the Vrukka as the by seeing the perirenal fat. Okay, yesterday I mentioned about the perirenal fat. So perirenal fat being seen as yellow in color, and they found it as there are two golakau, kukshi golakau. Golakau is plural, so there are two kukshi golakau. Okay, so one on the right and left. So possibly by understanding the collection of fat around the kidneys, so they connected it to the Medova Srotas. That's what my understanding is. Otherwise, we won't find any direct reference saying Vrukka. And the word meaning of Vrukka is actually an adjective or a derivative from the word Vruksha. Okay, so Vruksha, if you take the renal, what do you call, capillary network, so it looks like a tree. Okay, so that also another hidden meaning we can consider. But for that also, we don't have a direct reference in Ayurvedic textbooks to say that Vrukka is something which is related to the urinary system.
Sir, can you explain the renal angle once more, sir?
Renal angle, okay. Okay, so renal angle picture is here. You can see. Okay, so renal angle picture. Renal angle is nothing but the angle between the what you call the erector spinae muscle, the lateral margin of the erector spinae muscle, as well as okay here erector. See, this is the erector spinae muscle, and it is having lateral border. So this is the lateral border of the erector spinae muscle, and the 12th rib, and the 12th and the lower margin of the 12th rib. So this angle between the 12th rib and the erector spinae, we call it as renal angle.
If any other doubts are there, kindly ask. So I got one more doubt. So when urinary catheter is being introduced into the bladder,
Okay.
is sphincter is under nerve control. It is more of a surgical doubt. So,
I believe, see, the catheter insertion is always kind of either it is the catheter is put into the urinary or the through the urethra during certain conditions only. Whether either the urine is not emptying completely, or urine is not at all flowing out at all. So in these two conditions, we usually put the catheter. So I believe it is in one case it is the completely the external urethral sphincter may be completely blocking the flow of urine. So when there is urinary incontinence, okay, when the bladder is full, after it reaches a threshold, then either dribbling may start depending on the level of injury. Okay, so it depends on the underlying pathology, I believe.
sorry, can I add a point to which
Yes,
for that?
definitely. Yes, definitely.
I hope you will be comfortable with that.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
So regarding catheterization or insertion or introduction of any kind of intubulation into the body, always we should understand one thing: we are bypassing the function. So when urine is actually collected inside the urinary bladder, and when there is a problem in micturition, we just bypass the reflex by introducing a tube so that the nerve control will be active throughout. But as the presence of tube is there inside the urinary pathway or the urinary passage, we are just blocking it. So there is no it is only an external blockage which is actually happening. We are not controlling the nerve control which is coming from the brain or spinal cord to the urinary system. So this has to be understood. This is the same even if you are intubulating the patient during gastroendoscopy also. During that time also there will be peristaltic movements happening. There will be movements inside the esophagus happening. We are actually bypassing the sphincters. We are actually bypassing the function of the sphincter. That has to be understood. We are not controlling the nerves in that area. Nerve control, which is actually stimulated and which is inhibited, everything happens with the brain control or the upper central nervous system control. That will be going on throughout, but we are just bypassing it with an external apparatus. That is the only thing what is happening in intubulation. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dr.
Any other doubts?
I think to answer the earlier question, that is ejaculation and the micturition, whether it will happen together or not. So if a person is trying to do the sexual coitus with the full bladder, I feel I think the ejaculation will happen in a reverse direction into the bladder. I hope I'm correct. You can correct if I'm wrong.
Yes, sir. There is reverse ejaculation also happening if there is
Yeah, the retrograde ejaculation.
retrograde ejaculation.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And sir, one more doubt.
Yeah.
Uh, two ureters are actually getting connected to the neck of bladder.
Yeah.
So during for a normal person, during normal passage of urine, are both this ureter functional or any single one is functional at a time?
So in a healthy person, both the ureters will be functional or?
As two ureters are actually connecting to a single bladder.
Okay.
So drainage, will it happen at a time? Drainage happens on both or any one of the ureters?
I think it's both.
Okay. It is actually only during any kind of diseases related with any single kidney on one side. Then only there will be a functional malfunction in the passage of urine.
Yes.
In a normal person, definitely both the ureters will be patent and it will be normally functioning.
Yes, yes.
Any other doubts? Sir, regarding the navicular fossa,
Okay.
today's lecture, can you repeat that slide?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the navicular fossa is considered, it's a space or dilatation inside the glans penis. So usually the navicular fossa is bulging into the roof as well as the sides of the glans penis. And at the end of the this particular external urethral orifice, we have a sagittal slit or like opening, which is around 6 millimeter in length. So you can see the navicular fossa is here. And at the roof of the navicular fossa, we have the lacuna magna. So these are the anatomical features what we usually see in the navicular fossa.
Sir, one more doubt.
Yeah.
You told about the mucosal fold by which the trigone is actually formed inside the urinary bladder.
Yeah.
Is the mucous membrane of the bladder continuous throughout, or is there the same transitional epithelium which you told is present throughout the urinary passage? That means in prostatic membranous and also penile urethra.
No. The transition epithelium is very specific to the urinary bladder alone.
Okay. So can you explain posterior wall of prostatic urethra once more?
Posterior prostatic urethra. Yeah. See the okay. Is it visible?
No, sir.
Okay. So the prostatic the prostatic urethra, in its posterior wall, we have some features to remember. The urethral crest. First is the urethral crest. It's a elevated ridge. Okay, it's a ridge of mucous membrane. Okay, urethral crest or the veru montanum. Okay, so this one is the veru montanum or the urethral crest. So this urethral crest is actually, elevated slightly in the middle part. Okay, in the middle aspect, it is somewhat elevated. So this elevated part is known as colliculus seminalis. It's known as colliculus seminalis. And this colliculus seminalis is having three openings. Okay, the middle one opening is called as the prostatic utricle, and the other two openings on the sides is for the ejaculatory ducts. And on both sides of this particular urethral crest, we have a narrow gap. Okay, this is called as prostatic sinus. Okay, prostatic sinus. Okay, so this prostatic sinus will have the around 20 to 30 openings for the prostatic glands. Okay, the prostatic gland will have, these ducts will open into this particular sinus.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
If there is any other doubt, you can kindly ask right now. We are running out of time. If you have any doubt, kindly ask.
For Shukrameha, I just want to add some information.
Yes,
There are certain conditions where when you go for urine examination, I think you will find even the what you call the streaks of semen sometimes. I don't know exactly in which conditions it is seen. Okay, we can correlate those conditions to the Shukrameha.
Okay. Few more questions actually I received are more physiological, so I'll not be disturbing you asking too much of physiological questions.
Thank you.
If anyone have anatomical questions, you can kindly ask. Kindly avoid asking physiological questions.
Yeah, somebody asks a question called, "Sir, tell us about duplex ureter and complications related to it."
Yeah.
Okay. Complications, I don't know exactly. I just know it's a condition there, which is called as duplex ureter. Complication, like surgical person can answer, Sir, Dr. Anup will answer for that.
No, sir. We'll have a session for that, extra session for that.
Yeah.
As we are running out of time right now.
Okay.
Kindly ask questions which are related more anatomical. Avoid surgical or physiological questions, please. Okay, sir. I think there are no more doubts.
Yeah.
So I thank Dr. Sharad Chasti, HOD and Associate Professor, Department of Prajana Sharira, Amrita School of Ayurveda, especially for accepting the invitation very happily and without having a second thought. Sir told I'll be very happy to teach your students. So in spite of having your own classes for your own students, you gave 2 precious days for us, and we are so grateful on behalf of Department of Anatomy and also Shiva Ayurvedic Medical College. We are so grateful to you for your precious time which you gave us these 2 days.
Yeah, it was my pleasure too. Really thank you to Dr. Anup and the college management for inviting me for this particular guest lecture series. And it was my, what you call first of a kind of guest lecture since many years. Okay, I never gave any guest lecture to any other college actually. This was my first time. I'm really happy for that. Okay.
For that we are also privileged, sir.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes, it was great to see all the people. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Sir. And thank you so much. So before ending up the session, tomorrow there will not be any session as it is National Independence Day. The session 2 will be continuing from 16th and 17th of August. So on behalf of the college and department, I also wish you a very happy Independence Day, sir. and a very happy Independence Day to all the students and staff of Amrita School of Ayurveda also, and Shiva Ayurvedic Medical College.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks a lot.